Hey there, curious friend. I'm Courtney, a certified peer support specialist, and welcome to Wonderland Unlocked. In this series, Curious Connections, we're diving into the twists and turns of friendships and relationships, exploring trust, growth, and those unexpected moments in between. Because in the world of connections, nothing is ever quite as it seems, but it's always worth unlocking together. Welcome back to Wonderland Unlocked, where we journey through the wonders and complexities of mental health, identity, and emotional regulation. Today, we're diving deep into a concept that shapes so much of who we are in the context of our relationships, our looking glass self. Now, if you're familiar with Through the Looking Glass from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, you know that this is a world of reflections, reversals, and alternative realities. But what does it mean for our identity when we consider how others reflect us back to ourselves? How do our friendships influence the way we see ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, our very sense of self? In today's episode, we're going to explore the idea of the looking glass self, a concept from sociology that suggests our identities are shaped by how we think others see us. This idea is crucial in understanding how friendships influence our sense of self and how we, in turn, shape our relationships based on the images others reflect back to us. We'll dive into how the looking glass self shows up in our friendships, the impact it has on our identity, and how we can navigate these reflections in a way that helps us understand who we truly are outside of how others perceive us. We'll also explore the dynamics of self-image, validation, and the risks of relying too heavily on others' reflections to define us. Let's start by breaking down the idea of the looking glass self. The concept comes from Charles Horton Cooley's book, Human Nature and the Social Order, published in 1902. Cooley suggests that our self-concept is shaped by the way we think others perceive us. Essentially, we see ourselves reflected in the reactions and behaviors of others. He outlined three main components to his theory: how we imagine others see us, how we imagine they judge us, and how we feel about these judgments. When we interact with others, especially close friends, we internalize their reactions and feedback. These reflections, whether positive or negative, become part of our self-identity. Over time, this feedback loop can be a powerful force in our lives. In friendships, we may begin to rely on others' perspectives to understand who we are, sometimes to an extent that distorts our own sense of self. Let's pause and reflect for a moment. Have you ever changed the way you acted, spoke, or even thought because of how a friend reacted to you? Maybe you noticed that certain behaviors got you more attention or approval, and so you adapted to maintain that validation. That's the looking glass self at work, the way we respond to others' reflections of us. It's natural for our friendships to shape us. After all, we're social creatures, and we're constantly seeking connection and acceptance. But here's the catch. When we overly rely on external validation to define ourselves, we can become disconnected from our authentic selves. This is why it's so important to understand the impact of the looking glass self in our friendships. Now, let's dig deeper into how friendships specifically influence the way we see ourselves. Friendships are mirrors, often the first mirrors in our lives that show us who we are. We might feel loved, accepted, or valued by certain friends, and those feelings often shape our self-worth. On the flip side, negative feedback or misunderstandings in friendships can erode our confidence and self-esteem. But what happens when the reflection we see in our friends' eyes doesn't match the truth of who we are? Let's look at a couple of examples from Alice in Wonderland that parallel this idea. Take Alice's experience. For instance, she's constantly confused by the shifting nature of the world around her. Things don't always behave as they should, and she struggles to make sense of her surroundings. Similarly, when we rely too heavily on how others see us, we can feel lost or disoriented. Our identity becomes fluid, shifting depending on who we're with and how they react to us. In friendships, we often seek validation, a sense that we are valued, appreciated, and seen. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Healthy friendships should be a source of positive reinforcement and mutual support. However, the problem arises when we start to shape ourselves according to the expectations or judgments of others. For example, have you ever been in a friendship where you felt you needed to act a certain way to maintain that bond? Perhaps you found yourself changing parts of your personality or suppressing your true self just to fit in. Maybe you even adopted new beliefs or interests based on what you thought your friends valued. This can lead to a disconnection from your core self, making you feel like you're living in a looking-glass world. Everything is a reflection, but none of it feels truly you. Let's dive into a few key points here. Mutual reflection. Friendships ideally should be spaces where both parties reflect each other's authentic selves. This mutual reflection allows us to grow and evolve in healthy ways. But it's important to ensure that the reflection we see in our friends is not one of expectation, but one of acceptance. If we feel like we must perform for our friends, it can distort the relationship and prevent us from showing up as our true selves. Validation versus authenticity. Validation from others can be a powerful source of confidence, but it's crucial to differentiate between receiving affirmation for who we truly are and seeking validation for the sake of approval. Healthy friendships support our authentic self, not just the version of ourselves that fits into someone else's worldview. The danger of over-reliance. When we depend too much on others' opinion to define ourselves, we risk losing touch with our inner voice. We may start to see ourselves through a distorted lens, one that is shaped more by others' judgments than our own understanding of who we are. Let's reflect on that for a moment. Have your friendships shaped your identity? Have they empowered you to be yourself, or have you felt pressure to change who you are just to fit in? Vulnerability plays a key role in the formation of our identity within friendships. When we open up to someone, we are offering them a glimpse into who we truly are, our fears, dreams, insecurities, and desires. In healthy friendships, this vulnerability is met with empathy, understanding, and acceptance. It's in these moments of vulnerability that the most genuine reflections of who we are can emerge. These are the times when we feel seen, truly seen, not just for what we do, but for who we are at our core. And it's through that seeing, through those safe spaces in relationships, that we often begin to define or redefine ourselves. But what happens when vulnerability isn't met with acceptance? What if the reflection we get back is one of judgment, misunderstanding, or rejection? These experiences can shape our identity in harmful ways. We might internalize negative judgments or feedback, using it to form a distorted version of ourselves. This is especially dangerous in friendships where we constantly feel the need to perform or be someone we're not to maintain the bond. Now let's take a step back and really think about this. Have you ever shared something with a friend only to have them respond in a way that made you question whether or not you were valued? Maybe it was a comment that felt dismissive, or even critical when all you were looking for was understanding. Those moments can chip away at the parts of us that we've only just begun to understand, or worse, can make us doubt our very worth. Think about a time when you've shared something deeply personal with a friend only to feel misunderstood or invalidated. Perhaps they didn't react the way that you had hoped, or they said something that made you question yourself. This can be a jarring experience, and it may make you retreat into yourself, feeling like the reflection you see in that friendship isn't one of acceptance, but one of rejection. You might even start to withdraw, question the value of your emotions, or begin to feel isolated in your vulnerability. The sting of rejection can be so sharp that it pushes us to hold back, to close off parts of ourselves we once trusted others with. It's important to acknowledge that this isn't always intentional on the other person's part. Sometimes, friends may not know how to respond to vulnerability. They may not be equipped to meet us with the understanding or compassion we need. Or maybe they are struggling with their own emotions and are unable to offer the emotional space that we require. But that doesn't make the experience any less painful. And if we experience this kind of misunderstanding or judgment too many times, we can internalize those reactions and begin to see ourselves through that same critical lens. This is why vulnerability, although essential in deepening connections, is a delicate process. It requires mutual trust, and it can be easily disrupted when we feel unsafe or judged. When we feel unsupported in our vulnerability, we can start to doubt our right to express our emotions, our needs, and our true selves. We may feel like we have to build walls to protect ourselves, walls that can eventually isolate us, not just from others, but from who we really are. But the real danger here is when we lose sight of the fact that not all reflections are accurate. Just because someone responds to us with judgment or misunderstanding doesn't mean that their reflection of us is truth of who we are. It's just their perception, and they may not fully understand or appreciate us for the complexity that we bring. The issue arises when we begin to internalize their reflections as our truth. This is where our identity becomes fragile, as we build it upon others' perceptions that are incomplete or flawed. So, how do we protect ourselves from those harmful reflections that distort our sense of self? And how do we create friendships where vulnerability is not only welcomed, but met with acceptance and understanding? First and foremost, it's essential to practice self-compassion. When we offer our vulnerability to others, we need to first ensure that we are treating ourselves with kindness. If we offer parts of ourselves to someone who doesn't accept them in a way that we need, it's important to remind ourselves that their reaction isn't a reflection of our worth. It's not about us failing, but about their inability to meet us in that moment. If you feel rejected or misunderstood, remind yourself of the truth. You are worthy of compassion. You are worthy of being seen. Just because someone else couldn't provide that doesn't change your inherent value. It's a practice of reframing the situation and recognizing that their response is just one possible lens and not a reflection of who you truly are. Another essential step is choosing the right people to be vulnerable with. Vulnerability requires a level of trust that can't just be given freely to everyone. Healthy, supportive friendships are built on mutual respect and empathy, and it's crucial that we discern who is truly capable of handling our vulnerability in a healthy way. Look for friends who have shown themselves to be understanding, non-judgmental, and open to hearing your truth. These are the people who can offer the most accurate reflection of who you are. And if they mess up, if they're not always perfect in their response, there's room for growth. They will be willing to learn how to support you better, and you will be able to navigate those moments with the understanding that they're doing the best that they can. It's also crucial to set healthy boundaries in our friendships. If a friend consistently responds to your vulnerability in ways that feels invalidating or hurtful, it's okay to set limits on what you share with them. You're not obligated to offer every piece of yourself to everyone. And if your boundaries are crossed, it's important to speak up and express how their responses made you feel. Effective communication in friendship is vital in protecting our emotional well-being. Remember, boundaries aren't walls. They are ways to protect ourselves while still maintaining a connection with others. Lastly, we must reclaim our narrative. We have the power to define ourselves, not just through others' reflections, but through our own understanding of who we are. We can take the parts of ourselves that we've shared with friends and hold them with pride, even if those reflections weren't always positive. Our identity is made up of so much more than one moment of rejection, one misunderstanding, or one hurtful comment. Reclaiming our narrative means choosing to define ourselves not by others' judgment, but by our own inner truth. So, what does it mean to create a friendship where vulnerability is met with acceptance? It means surrounding ourselves with people who understand that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a bridge to deepen connection. It means looking for those who can hold space for our emotions without rushing to judge or fix them. Vulnerability, when met with empathy, can allow us to see ourselves more clearly, to grow, and to evolve into our truest selves. It also means protecting ourselves from those harmful reflections that don't honor our truth. If a friendship repeatedly distorts our sense of self, if we feel like we must hide, perform, or be something we're not, it's okay to take a step back and reevaluate that relationship. You deserve to be seen for who you truly are. And it's important that the friendships you invest in align with that value. In the end, vulnerability is one of the most powerful tools we have to shape our identity and deepen our relationships. But like any powerful tool, it requires care, boundaries, and most importantly, self-love. When we can navigate vulnerability with self-compassion, understanding, and trust, we open ourselves up to the most authentic connections and reflections of who we are. I encourage you to take a moment today to reflect on your friendships, both the ones that nurture you and the ones that leave you questioning your worth. How can you deepen your vulnerability in the friendships that truly support you? And how can you protect your sense of self from the friendships that might not honor it? Vulnerability is a gift, but it's one that must be nurtured with care. And when it's met with the right kind of acceptance, it can be the doorway to some of the most profound connections you'll ever experience. Take a deep breath, trust yourself, and remember, you are worthy of being seen. Let's take a step back and think about the balance between external validation and our internal sense of self-worth. Our friends can reflect our best qualities back to us, but that reflection should not be the sole source of our identity. We must also cultivate a strong internal sense of self-worth that doesn't rely solely on others' opinions. Here's the thing. External validation can be uplifting, but if we rely on it too much, it can lead us to feel unmoored or dependent on others to feel good about ourselves. It's essential that we create a solid foundation of self-worth, one that doesn't hinge on the way we are seen or judged by others. When we find this balance, we can navigate our friendships with confidence and authenticity, knowing that while we value the reflections we receive from others, we are not defined by them. In your friendships, are you able to balance external validation with internal self-worth? Can you still feel worthy and validated even when others may not reflect the best version of you back to you? Before we wrap up today's episode, I encourage you to consider the ways in which your friendships shape your identity. Do they help you grow into the person you want to be? Or do they keep you tethered to an image of yourself that isn't true to who you are? And most importantly, how can you begin to see yourself beyond the reflections of others provide? That's all for today's episode of Wonderland Unlocked. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the looking glass self and how our friendships shape the very essence of who we are. I hope you leave today's episode with a greater sense of awareness about the reflections you see in others and how you can navigate those relationships with authenticity and self-respect. Until next time, remember, Wonderland is always unfolding, and so is your journey of self-discovery. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and above all, keep reflecting on the wonderful person you are, independent of anyone's gaze.